This is Locked On Sports Atlanta, and it's time for the Atlanta Football Party, only on Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
To the Atlanta Football Party, your home for the best Atlanta Falcons football talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tenitra Batiste. Alongside me, our Falcons analyst, Jarvis Davis, Locked On Falcons host, Aaron Freeman, and 11 Alive anchor, Maria Martin. Today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. And of course, our Atlanta Football Party is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So would you be okay with the Falcons taking a certain dog? We'll talk about that. And also, there is a guy, a Pro Bowler, who is a secondary player. You know, we've been talking a lot about that. Is this a guy that maybe the Falcons should consider in a couple of weeks, of course, after we get past the draft, but also is offensive tackle the only acceptable non-defensive player the Falcons should draft? We will touch base on that as well. But first things first, let's talk about it. As we've talked about it ad nauseum. I feel like we've spoken about this for about 357 days. Yeah, I'm going to go with that because we've been talking about it since the day after last year's draft. But ultimately, here we are, Jarvis, a week away from the first round, the start of the 2025 NFL draft. So let's take a little peek into the future, looking into your crystal ball for what's going to happen next week, about a weekend, say 10 hours away. What will your response be after the Falcons make their pick at 15?
I'm trying to hold from being disappointed because they don't draft a player that I want them to draft, which is Mike Green. But I'm tempering my expectations as to, as long as they feel the edge need, I will be okay. I will be okay if they do that, because here's the thing. I'm real big on making sure you shoring up these trenches and building a defense that you know you can count on for the next few years. And I'm sure Raheem Morris is right along with me on that one. And I'm tired of the Band-Aids. I'm tired of them trying to get guys that are 30 plus, no shade of Leonard Floyd. But, hey, I want to see some young guys that we can count on Sundays on third and long and get to the quarterback. So, yeah, for me, I'm tempering my expectations because they might not draft the guy that I want them to draft, because that's been true for the past 7 years, 8 years, 10 years.
Who's the last player they drafted that you liked in the first round? Just curious.
Oh, gosh. Probably Chris Lindstrom. I was real big on Chris Lindstrom coming out. But, he's an offensive lineman. So, hey.
So there.
It's a little shaky. So, but, yeah, so I think right now I'll be okay if they draft that edge player. And I'm holding being disappointed because they didn't draft the player that I wanted to draft.
Yeah, and so I'm with you on that one with Chris Lindstrom. I'm always going to lean in favor of what I like to call the brains of the operation, which is the O-line. So, yeah, I was absolutely excited about the Chris Lindstrom pick in the first round, that is. So I think that part, I like that you are taking a more tempered approach to this so that you can prepare yourself accordingly, Jarvis, if you don't get the position player or the actual player that you are looking for the Falcons to get. But I would say, too, Maria, as Jarvis was talking, it took me back to where everybody was, including the guy in the box down. And technically, am I right? Because Aaron and I did the postcast for Locked On last year, which we'll also be doing this year. So you guys check that out. Sure. But yeah, literally, Maria, I was telling our executive producer, let me add Aaron Freeman. Like, I'm just going to throw one question out there. I'm going to let dude roll. And it was like the funniest thing, because I'm telling you, I don't know if I've ever seen Aaron go off with his hair on fire. No pun intended. Like I saw with him last year. But that said, Maria, I'm going to come to you first because we were talking about this pre-show. You'll, of course, be in Green Bay, so hopefully we'll be able to catch you there real time and kind of talk about the atmosphere and everything. But you were also there last year, I think, in Detroit. And before we go into where you're going to how you're going to feel after this year. Take us back to how you felt last year after you heard that, and any Falcons fans or media or whomever, those people who are around you when Mykel Penix Jr. was picked at 8.
Yeah, I mean, last year was chaos is like the best way to describe it. I think you guys have heard my draft story before, how a former coworker of mine who now works at ESPN came up to me probably 30 minutes before the very first pick. So pick number 1, 30 minutes. He said, I need you to start preparing a story for the Falcons to pick Mykel Penix. And I said, you're literally psycho. What are you talking about? And he was like, you're going to be sorry if you're not prepared for that to come out. And I was like, why are you messing with me? I was like, I know we're cool, but like, stop messing with me. And then as soon as it happened, I was like, oh, and it's funny because as soon as he walked away, I started like secretly typing a story, like just to get ready.
Right.
And I admitted that to him afterwards. And it was just crazy because I was in, how it works is where the media is. They're in like a holding room. You can be out where the draft is happening, but it's kind of, it doesn't really make sense for you to do that because they'll bring the picks to the media. They do like a whole carousel type of deal. Obviously, if they're present at the draft location, which fingers crossed, our pick is this year, because last year, obviously, Mykel Penix was not in Detroit. So, as soon as that came off the board, there was just like this audible. I've never been in a room full of media members where they're audibly surprised. I mean, it was everyone in the room was like, what? Like you heard things coming out of everyone's mouth. And I don't anticipate that kind of reaction this year in Green Bay. I hope that we are getting the free guarantee next Thursday. And I hope that at the end of the night, when I'm doing my live shot for 11 Alive and I have my voice back, please God. So a week from today, I hope that I'm saying for the first time in Terry Fontenot's tenure as a general manager, he has picked a defensive player in the first round. To me, that's a win. There's a couple different ways that they can go with that, and we've talked about that. And I am starting to believe that Mike Green will not be available at their pick. So, who else is out there? There's plenty of good edge guys who I think can make an immediate impact. Mykel Williams has garnered a lot of attention, which I know we'll talk about. But to me, that's what I want. I want to be leading my live shot with, for the first time ever, Mr. Terry has picked a defensive player. And that's all that matters to me in this instance, because if we're talking about, it won't be a quarterback, but if we're talking about like a Kyle Pitts or a Bijan Robinson, or we're making history for drafting an offensive player as high, no, that's over. Like pick an edge guy. Let's move on. Let's make an immediate impact on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, that's not the history you want to have, because Aaron, I don't think any one of us wants to be having a conversation. I know I don't want to have this conversation with you again this year, because it was fun and it was funny, but I really still don't want to have that kind of, how you kind of turn and churn the knife. Like, I don't want that for you. I want better for you. I want the free guarantee because that'll make everybody happy. But for you, kind of going back to where you were last year, but also fast forwarding to where you will be this year, where do you hope to be? What do you hope to be feeling like after the Falcons make their pick at 15?
Well, to be honest with you, T, I don't really remember the conversation we had last year, just probably because
it was a blur to you? Okay.
You blacked out.
Angry or something like that. And so I just didn't remember. I remember we had an interesting conversation, but I don't remember actually what I said on that thing. So I'll have to go back and check that out just to remind myself. But like I'm with Maria and I've been pushing this since the end of the season. They got to take an edge rusher. They got to take a pass rusher. It's just like a no-brainer. And with Jarvis, to me, it's a question of who, not what, they take at that position and how the board falls and all that stuff. Yeah. But like there is the potential for the Falcons to zig when we expect them to zag. There's always that potential. And in fact, most years it's a certainty that they're going to do something unorthodox. And so for me, I'm like with Maria, where it's like if they don't go with that edge rusher that, we know 100% they're definitely going to take in round one. It's easier for me to get over it if it's another defensive player. It's going to be real hard for if they take an offensive player. It's like, and that player may go on to have a very successful career in Atlanta, but it's just one of those conversations of like the reason why this team continues to struggle with defense and pass rush. It just their refusal. They're always a willingness to come up with some excuse to not take the player when the player is just sitting there. And I feel like this year of all years, unlike the last couple of years where they were picking in the top 10, where you know, when you're picking that high, you want to maximize that pick. And sometimes it's just like, hey, just take the best player, take the safest player and whatnot. I think this year, because of how this draft is structured, where there's only a handful of guys that everybody agrees are top end guys, and it's just kind of pick your flavor, you can get away with not necessarily picking a guy that everybody had in their top 15 on their draft board. You can get a guy that's 28th on the consensus draft board or whatever in this particular draft. So it feels like everything is leading for the Falcons to go in the direction that we're all saying that they should definitely go into. But knowing the Falcons, they'll find a way to wiggle out of it and do something weird, and we'll just be sitting here like what is happening? And so we'll have another interesting conversation, T, on the postcast that I will completely black out from a year from now.
And I don't want you to black out, trip out, or do anything out of the ordinary. I just want Terry Fontenot and company to do the things that they should do. And hopefully, and I think you guys are watching the Twitter feeds as well, but hopefully maybe they're up in Athens one more time as we speak, because of course, Mykel Williams, who we'll talk about a little bit later in the show, and Jalen Walker are having another pro type day in Athens as we speak. And both players are expected to do position drills. We do know that the Saints have a contingent out there. So hopefully if one of us sees that there is a report that the Falcons have a contingent out there, we'll throw that out there to our audience as well. But we do hope to get that information and get that feedback that they are out there in Athens. Now, Jarvis, as much as we love to talk about what we want, I don't think this is just a want to with getting a defensive player in the first round. I think this is a has to, as it relates to Terry Fontenot's legacy, as it relates to him basically saving his job, if we're being honest, because him selecting a defensive player who can be a game changer or generational, if you will, changes the trajectory of that defense to complement the offense that he's put together that'll hopefully put this team into the postseason. So that said, do you feel like this is one of those first round picks, or this is the first round pick that will define his tenure here as GM?
I think it's going to be a big part of it. Let me say that, because I've been saying it all off season. They need to have someone who come in here with a high floor and have an immediate impact in year one, because basically the 2024 draft class took a year off, essentially. Sans 3 games from Michael Penix. That was the only peak we got into that draft class this year. We don't know what we're going to get from any of those guys, right? You know, so for me, I think it's a matter of making sure you hit on this first round guy and then compliment him, you know, as you go through the draft. Let my response be to all your draft picks, the 5 that you have. Let my response be, I get it. That makes sense. That makes all the sense in the world. I don't want to say after the second round pick, because we know in the first round they're going to select an edge rusher. You know what I'm saying? We know that's going down.
Free guarantee
is in, baby. I already cashed it already. But in the second round, if we're sitting up here watching and they draft for offensive tackle, okay. No, I don't want to say that. I want to say, you know what? That Maxwell Harrison fell, or Siobhan Ravel out of East Carolina. Oh, he fell to the second round, 46. Oh, bet that makes all the sense in the world, because it wouldn't be no pressure for him to play in that first year for real, you know. And he kind of eased his way into it because you have quote unquote starters already in play that you'll be okay with, right? That's the reason why they signed the offer back. That's the reason why they moved Clark Phillips into that nickel spot. So and they re-signed Mike Hughes. So that, you know, that's a plan. That's a plan, you know. But for me, if they're in a situation where you're talking about offensive tackle, a stand-up linebacker in the second round, man, I don't want to hear that. So yeah, this is big for him. Not only in the first round, it's huge. It's a big part of it. But I want those draft picks that come behind that first round pick to actually complement him and helping them ultimately build this defense to where it needs to be.
Maria, what about you? I mean, when you think about this, is this the defining moment for Terry Fontenot's tenure, for his building legacy with the Falcons?
I'm with Jarvis. I mean, I certainly think there's a big weight on it. You know, I think that of all the general managers in the National Football League, Terry is probably one of the ones that feels the fire to his feet a little bit more than everybody else, especially because of the way that recent drafts have gone. And when you're talking about specifically just the first round, because that was your question, just the first round, I think that there's a lot of focus and attention on Terry to get this one right. And some may argue that the Mykel Penix Jr. pick worked out. And it was one of the more contentious picks that we've seen really in recent history and draft history. And it was very much we're going to have to wait out some time to see if this one plays out and works out, just especially because of the way, you guys know, how everything went down. Now you're trying to say this might have been a pick that worked out. We have 3 games for Mike, so we're hoping that's enough to give us a sample size of he really is the quarterback of the future. That's what everybody believes, right? So this player that they pick, this defensive player, this edge player that they're going to pick in the first round, I think will really set the tone for how things go for Terry. This is a very important year as a whole, and it has already started, but really like the big conversations are going to come from Green Bay for Terry specifically. And if he goes out there and in the first round picks up, I don't even know, even if he picks up a tackle in the first, like an offensive tackle in the first round, it's not going to go well for anybody. And that's the nicest way I can put that. I wanted to play this audio for you. Okay. This was at the draft last year in Detroit. This is fan reaction from Mykel Penix. So this is what we don't need to happen. Are you ready? This is from my interview in Detroit.
Here with your whole family from Georgia, you guys flew to Detroit to see what the Falcons would do at it. They picked a quarterback. They picked Mykel Penix Jr. What was your reaction?
We were not happy with the pick. We were hoping to get Dallas Turner or Latu because we need an edge. We just spent all the money on Kirk Cousins, and then we get another quarterback that we felt would have probably been a second-round pick anyway.
I know Falcons fans have had their fair share of frustrations over the last couple of years. Where does this one stack up since you're so frustrated?
I think this is probably one of the worst draft picks that I have seen.
Okay,
that's fine.
So a little aggressive.
Yeah, which you don't want, right? Which you
a
don't
little
want to happen.
aggressive. However, he's talking about we need an edge. It's the same narrative we've heard. That was my point. We've heard this narrative for years and years and years. Like this is the year, and if this is not the year that he does it, he's gonna have some serious things to answer this time around.
This is a now or never situation from him. And Aaron, just real quick, and then I want to get you to wrap us up. I did confirm, and hey, when you get a new phone, things happen. So you don't get notifications on your Twitter. I got to go back to getting my notifications. But yes, assistant GM Kyle Smith and DC Jeff Ulbrich are indeed in Athens this morning to see Jalen Walker and Mykel Williams do walkthroughs and do drills. So I think that's very encouraging for the masses. It should be exactly.
That Kyle is there.
Yes. Yeah. Assistant. Yes. That's what I'm sorry. If I didn't say assistant GM Kyle Smith, I apologize if I said
you
that.
did.
Okay.
You did.
Aaron, if you can wrap us up super duper quick and tell us whether or not you think this is a will situation for Terry Fontenot.
Yeah, I think what Maria and Jarvis have said, you look at Terry Fontenot's legacy, it's the Mykel Penix pick, how that works out, and getting that immediate impact defender in this draft class, not only in round 1, but in multiple rounds in this draft. And I think that's going to be 2 big factors in how people are going to feel about Terry Fontenot a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, if he's able to pull that off. I think it's really all about his legacy.
Yeah, well, you heard us talking about these pre-draft visits. There's one today that is going on in Athens, and there was one that Mykel Williams did with the Falcons before. Are you okay with that? Are you okay with him? We'll talk about that on the other side. This episode of our Atlanta Football Party is brought to you by GameTime. There's nothing like the atmosphere of an NBA playoff game. Every bucket, every defensive stop, every moment feels huge. It's electric in the arena, and with GameTime, you can be part of it without the stress of last-minute ticket hunting. GameTime makes it fast and easy to get playoff tickets, even when demand is sky high. Prices on the app actually go down as tip-off gets closer, and their last-minute deals can save you up to 60%. So here's why I have used GameTime. Last minute deals, as I mentioned, you can save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. I've done it for concerts, and I can tell you it does not disappoint. The all-in pricing means no surprise fees at checkout. What you see is what you pay. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Now, terms do apply, but again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download GameTime today for last-minute tickets and the lowest price guaranteed. So, Maria, the fun continues and the intrigue continues because on the last day of pre-draft visits, Mykel Williams visited with the Falcons. The Falcons are now visiting with Mykel Williams today, of course, along with Jalen Walker. Williams is projected, at least as of early today, late last night, to still go mid-first round, which, hey, if you're the Falcons, that's exactly where your pick is should you not move up or down the board. That said, would you be okay if with the 15th pick in the 2025 NFL Draft, the Atlanta Falcons select Mykel Williams?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt I would be okay with them picking Mykel Williams. I've watched him for the last 3 years at Georgia, and he just, to me, has a very high ceiling and floor. A lot of people are questioning his abilities simply because he hasn't been able to play a ton. He played an entire year through injury, and even in that high ankle sprain that he played through all last year, he was still able to be pretty productive. So if you're looking at him and you're thinking, okay, he had this injury and also was productive, what can he do when he's fully healthy? And he's working really hard to prove that now. He's got a really good size. And if you were comparing him and Mike Green, where Mike Green scratches the head a little bit as a run defender, Mykel Williams replaces that. Mykel Williams is an excellent run defender. That's something that I think the Falcons really need. And he's somebody who can go in and give you an immediate impact. Now, his sack numbers obviously are not eye-popping, and that goes back to simply starting only 5 games and playing through the injury. 5 sacks is going to come with that. Whereas Mike Green, as we all know, led the FBS. He had 17. So if you're comparing those two players, because those are, and I'm just throwing out 2 that I think I've seen a lot, picked up as the first pick for the Falcons. But yeah, Mykel Williams would be phenomenal. And even in those conversations, I think I said this a couple weeks ago, conversations that I had with several of the Falcons contingent members at Georgia's Pro Day, mention Mykel over Jalen to me specifically. Not that they were necessarily picking him, but that he was more of a player that would fit what they're looking for than Jalen Walker. Because I know a lot of Falcons fans are like, oh, Jalen Walker, when you're talking about the Georgia kids, they like a Mykel Williams type player over a Jalen Walker. And it makes sense to me. So yeah, I absolutely would love if they would take Mykel in the first round.
And Aaron, if you heard the name Mykel Williams coming from Roger Goodell at the 15th pick for the Falcons, would you be happy with that? Would that be pleasing to you?
Yes, it would please me. Like I'm not as high on Mykel as other people are. He's not like at the top of my edge wish list. But at the end of the day, as we've discussed, as long as it's someone who can bring some pressure off the edge, I'm not going to complain about that, even if it's not necessarily my favorite flavor of edge rusher. But I do think Maria nails it in the sense of the thing that Mykel has going for him is that sort of floor where he can come in and be an impact run defender. He has the power and the length when it comes to being that pass rusher that can collapse the pocket from the outside. And, I'm not saying he's going to have the same type of production that this guy had coming off of defensive rookie of the year type of production, but we saw with Jared Verse that the power translates, right? That's one of the things that NFL offensive tackles really are worried about is guys going through their chest. And Mykel Williams has that ability and more so of that ability than maybe pretty much any other edge rusher in this draft class other than maybe Shamar Stewart out of Texas A&M. And so for that reason, I think Mykel Williams makes a ton of sense. We know that because of that run defending ability, you're not going to need to hide him on early downs, which was a big part of why maybe Arnold Ebiketie didn't get off to the greatest start in his NFL career because they didn't really trust him to be an every down football player. It's the same reason why D'Angelo Malone is buried on the depth chart and whatnot. And so I do feel like Mykel Williams would be an example of the Falcons, not saying learning from their mistake, but sort of evolving from how they looked at a guy and sort of guys like Mike Green and Donovan Ezeraku and Jalen Walker as well, guys that may be a little bit undersized by NFL standards that may struggle to be that every down run defender in addition to what they can bring as pass rusher. I think Mykel Williams would be a step in the right direction. So I would have no complaints about Mykel Williams. To me, the question is just going to be, do I think he's going to be an eventual double-digit sack guy. Probably, I wouldn't bet on that, but I do think he'll be a solid player that can provide you with reliable pressure and also have that plus ability on early downs that I think would make him a complete piece of the defense. Maybe not necessarily the guy that offenses are game planning against on a weekly basis. I think, other guys are maybe a little bit better bets to have that type of potential, but he's just going to be a solid player that exactly what you're getting in Mykel Williams. And, when it comes to the Falcons, like, I'm not going to complain about a safe player that you know exactly what you're going to get.
Yeah. And Jarvis, it's an interesting concept or an interesting point that Free makes, because when you look at Mykel, I think everybody would agree that he's a good pick, a solid pick. But are you, and I think you'd be comfortable with him as well. After all, we named a whole segment after him for our Bulldog shows all of last year. But ultimately with him, is it because, do you feel like he's a good pick because you see the potential in Mykel Williams as Mykel and what he can do? Or is it more because you see the potential because you know that he's come through a Kirby Smart system that has produced defensive players that succeed at the next level?
I mean, to be honest with you, kind of ask the first part of the question. Like, for me, I don't know if I'll be comfortable with Mykel Williams. Here's why. I talk about high floor guys, right? I know, like Free and Maria, they beautifully laid out how good he is against the run. Not going to argue against that. But my whole thing is, what do we need? What does this city needs to watch? What do guys can do on third down? Because at the end of the day, like a wise man that used to play for the Philadelphia Eagles, man, we stopped the run on the way to the quarterback. That's the type of mentality that I want to have. And I think that, if they bring a guy like that in, I think he'll be more of a prototypical guy than what they actually need, right? You're talking about Lynn, 6'5", 265, I get it. Walking and stepping off the bus, man, like, oh, yeah, that's the dude, right? But when you pop on the tape, like, I'm a firm believer in, if you don't have a plan, you plan to fail. And when it comes to pass rush downs, Mykel does not have a plan. He doesn't. So for me, I feel like you got to get a guy who has the potential to be that explosive player in against the run, and also have a repertoire of moves, of pass rush moves, and knows exactly what he's going to do when in pass rush situations. Those guys are going to win most of the time. So I can't go with a guy like Mykel because, and to answer the second part of your question, T, I feel like part of this is because of the jersey. Like, if you take the jersey off, put him at Ole Miss. No shade, Maria. You know what I'm saying? Or
What
put him
the
at
heck?
or put him in a
Ole Miss, so I don't know.
Yeah.
Not be wearing an Ole Miss hat. And
SEC.
That is the LSU, Auburn, Missouri. You said a whole Ole Miss.
Say it again.
I
You
think
know how
you
many
didn't say
colleges
LSU,
there are out
Missouri.
there?
A whole
You know
Ole
how
Miss.
many colleges there are?
She only has that hat on.
She has the hat on. I mean, come on, man. What are we talking about
No,
here?
it doesn't mean you have to read what's on my hat. What the heck?
And read her in the process. Come on, Jarvis. Still bad. No, go ahead.
So let me try to bring the show
That's
back.
what I'm saying.
Let me try to bring us back on the rails, right?
Another school. You're going to make me lose my voice again. What about Missouri? Okay.
Okay, let's put a Missouri jersey on him and just really look at the bare bones, turn on the tape, and imagine him in a Missouri Tigers jersey in a black and gold. And you're saying, okay, is this guy going to be a guy that can come in the first year and have an immediate impact on defense? I don't think I can say yes to that question. I'm not saying that Mykel is going to be a bum in the NFL. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is I'm thinking about specific. I'm being intentional about this thing because, like, that's the problem with the Falcons. They haven't been intentional about getting this pass rush right or getting this pressure up, getting these sack numbers up. Like, they haven't been intentional about it because every time they drafted an offensive player, we went BPA, all that stuff. Whoa. But yet you passed on guys that can actually touch the quarterback on a consistent basis. Now, granted, am I complaining? I love watching Bijan Robinson do his thing. I love watching Drake do his doggone thing, and I'm going to stop right there. You know what I'm saying? Michael Penix, I feel like he's going to be one of those guys, and I'm going to stop right there when it comes to those first-round draft picks. So, for me, I'm in a space where you got to be intentional about it. You can't play around with getting this thing right. You got to say, okay, as much as Mykel Williams fits our prototypical guy, 6'5", 265. Don't they got a guy like that already on the squad? 6'6", 290. I think he blew up to like 295. And Zach Harrison, are we still waiting on him too? Are we still waiting to see what he's going to be? Is he going to pop out this year? So, yeah, we got to be intentional about it. And I don't think Mykel Williams would be in the fix. Not necessarily he has to do it on his own, but I don't think that fits the narrative that they need to be having in order for the defense to be better.
So translation, Jarvis said that pretty much everybody that Terry Fontenot has drafted in that edge rusher space has yet to pop off and show people something. And you don't think Mykel Williams will necessarily do the same in a timely manner as well. And anybody got time for that? Did I translate that correctly?
Yes. Okay. Who popped out? Who popped out? Who?
Yeah, but
Who?
I don't know.
Who popped out?
No, but you know what? Okay, so right. So let me ask you guys this, and this is real quick because we definitely gotta get back on track. But Maria, Bree, when you guys think about it, Jarvis makes a great point about the guys who haven't quite popped off yet. They might have shown some shades, but they haven't popped off yet. But that said, what would be the difference if Terry went with a guy like Mykel in taking a chance that he would be the guy that actually would do it sooner rather than later when we just didn't see it out of those guys? Like, is there something you see in Mykel or, and I think this is valid, by the way, is there something that you believe in and trust in what Kirby Smart and his staff have still instilled in Mykel such that we may not have seen it yet? But Zach Harrison, you didn't come from UGA's program. Arnold WKT, you didn't come from UGA's program. Mykel Williams has, and a Trayvon Walker, just as an example, will be the guy who went at number one, where everybody was like, wait a minute. And we kind of know what we see from him now. Just throwing that out to you two before we wrap.
Well, I think you know what you're getting from Georgia players. I'm going to say something controversial. I think the success of recent Georgia players is kind of enhancing this year's crop of Georgia players a little bit, because I don't think this year's crop of Georgia players are as good as the previous ones.
I don't think that's controversial.
And so like I feel like
that's fair. That's a fair statement.
Yeah. And so like I do feel like some of these guys are getting a little bit of a Georgia bump because you know what you're getting. But in terms of like having that upside to be the guys that are the difference makers on a playoff team, like we saw with the Philadelphia Eagles, I don't know how many of those guys are coming from this Georgia class, but I do think because of the Georgia pedigree, you are getting a relatively high floor that you know these guys can come in and contribute on an NFL roster.
Yeah, that's kind of where I come from with Mykel specifically. And I think Aaron hit the nail on the head. You know, we've talked about it ad nauseum that this defensive class that Kirby has had is not his best. It is by far not his best. It doesn't mean that they're not great. I mean, he's had unbelievable defensive classes in his tenure at Georgia. However, every single player that's coming out of the University of Georgia program, and this by no means, hello, I'm wearing an Ole Miss hat. This is not like a everyone should pick Georgia players statement. The Falcons clearly have never drafted a first or a second round Georgia player. So, and I don't think that's intentional. I just think that's the way that the draft board falls sometimes. But when you're picking up a guy like Jalen Walker, Mykel Williams, anybody that's coming out of this draft class, you know exactly what you're going to get, if not more than you've already seen them do in college. They're reliable. They're versatile, which is, I think, critical specifically for this Falcons defensive situation. Jalen and Mykel both have so much experience on so many different levels of the defense. Those are the type of players that you want in the NFL.
That's fair. That is fair. So, yeah, I think it'll be interesting. The debate rages on whether or not Mykel is that guy and whether or not he's that guy for the Falcons. And there is a veteran in the secondary who's out there. Question might be, is he one of those guys? You know, Raheem Morris likes a good reunion, but is he one of those guys he needs to reunite with? We'll talk about that next. So, Aaron, I want to say Leonard Floyd is our most recent Raheem Morris celebrate, reunited, and we feel so good, blah, blah, blah. Well, looks like there might be a possibility for another one of those guys because the 7-time Pro Bowler, Jalen Ramsey, from the Miami Dolphins. It looks like they're both open and willing for him to move on. So with that said, and like he's a guy, of course, that Raheem Morris has experience coaching, wouldn't be surprised to see him land in Atlanta. But do you feel like he would be one of those guys that it would be a good move to choose that veteran to kind of come and join this secondary?
Well, if we're talking about getting the 2021 Rams defense together, we got Jordan Fuller, we got Leonard Floyd, Jalen Ramsey, Von Miller's out there. The one guy that the Falcons need to get is the guy pictured behind me, Aaron Donald. And I just saw something on Twitter today where he was like curling like 135-pound dumbbells or whatever.
Ridiculous.
Popping those things. Like, all right, guys,
so ridiculous.
All right, Aaron, we get it. Like, you're the strongest man alive. Like, calm down. Like, why you on social media? So, like, if that guy's coming through the door, I'm all about getting this 2021 Rams defensive reunion. But talking about Jalen Ramsey specifically, I think the Jalen Ramsey situation is an interesting one because I talked about this the other day on Locked On Falcons. Is like Jalen wants to play for a contender, and like he has no patience for a bad team. Like the minute the Rams started losing, he was out of there. The minute the Dolphins started losing, he's out of there. And like for the Falcons, like Jalen would be a great piece to the secondary. He can play safety. He can play nickel corner. He can play outside corner. He's this sort of joker on the defense, and we saw what Raheem was able to do with him in LA. But he got no patience for foolishness, as they say, when it comes to whatever the Atlanta Falcons are bringing to the table. And we all are sitting here hoping that the Falcons are going to be great, but like they start the season, 1-3 or something like that. Like he's going to be calling out coaches. He's going to. Everybody except for Raheem, he's gonna do Jalen Ramsey stuff, which is that's fine.
Kind of need a player like that, in my opinion, but okay.
So like I just think like he'd be an interesting piece, but like the Falcons are not in the position right now where I think Jalen Ramsey makes a lot of sense. If the Falcons, basically how I termed it, if the Falcons were still rolling with Kirk Cousins and they were coming off a winning record season and a playoff season, and they were looking for that last piece to sort of push them into that tier with the Eagles, with the Lions, with whoever else you put at the top of the NFC, Jalen Ramsey would make a ton of sense. But where the Falcons are at right now, like this is not really a place for Jalen Ramsey, but I wish him the best. I enjoy all the trash talk that he does, the persona or whatnot, but I say, let somebody else deal with all that and all the baggage that Jalen Ramsey brings to the table. That's not necessarily the Falcons right now.
I think that's such a great spin to put on it, Free. And so I kind of want to switch gears and spin it that way, Maria, because the question that we posed to start was whether or not Raheem Morris could possibly reunite with another one of his former players. And do you see the Falcons kind of making that move? But Free might actually make a better point. Do you see Jalen Ramsey making that move to the Falcons? Because he literally has become kind of that gun for hire, right? So he spends his first 4 seasons with the Jaguars, but then he spends 4 seasons with the Rams and then 2 with the Dolphins. But there was a consistency there. I'm leaving the Jaguars because this franchise is trash and I see you going nowhere. Rams, I'm with you as a hired gun. You get to the promised land, but then wait a minute, ain't nobody got time for a rebuild, so I'm out. Miami, you looked like you were next up in the AFC. You ain't. So now here we are with the Falcons. And sometimes, Maria, I think we forget, unless we know that Raheem Morris has some persuasive powers, but I think sometimes we forget it's not just about what the Falcons may want, but whether that veteran or that free agent or that player who wants to be traded sees this as a viable landing spot.
I have no belief that he sees the Falcons as a good landing spot for him. I really don't. I mean, the only way that I could see it is his relationship with Raheem. He has been incredibly vocal about how he feels about Raw. He goes on tangents sometimes about how great he is. And when Raw was hired in Atlanta, Jalen tweeted out, was like, oh, they're getting one of the best or whatever he said. He's always been one of Raw's guys, but just how far does that actually go when you're talking about a player who really wants to win? I mean, and he's been very vocal about that. You can be vocal about a ton of people that you care about and you love. It doesn't mean they're going to take you to the promised land just because you have a good relationship. And if they were a little bit further along, I like that point that Aaron was making. And let's say that veteran quarterback Kirk Cousins went off and they were contending and all it, like, that's what they envisioned. That was the plan. And so if that actually came through, then you can talk about a guy like Jalen Ramsey. And let's not forget the financial piece. Like, how the heck are the Falcons going to make that work? Somebody who takes on Jalen Ramsey is going to take on north of $20 million. And the Falcons are near the bottom in cap space in the NFL. It's not financially feasible. Now you can do some things and be creative to make it financially feasible, obviously. But I don't see any scenario where Jalen, who clearly step after step of his career is like, I want to be somewhere where I can win. I don't see how he looks at the Falcons defense, who has had a very, very strong on paper and in front of all of our eyeballs record of not doing things good defensively. I don't see how he sees that and says, all right, this is my spot.
Yeah. And Jarvis, Jalen is solid as far as his numbers go for 2024. They're a little bit down in the interception department, but for the most part, solid. But he's also 10 years in. So at this point, when you have a draft that is this deep with corners, do you really even need him when you could get somebody who has potential to go up? You can get him on the cheap, and you already have a pretty solid core of veterans in the secondary for the Falcons.
Yeah, I'm all about building through the draft. Like I mentioned earlier, like, get some guys that can come here and that's young and cheap. Get some cheap labor. I hate to put it like that, but like, that's what y'all need. Y'all need cheap labor that's going to have an immediate impact. Like, I will continue to say that until Sunday next week. And we're sitting here with them going with all defensive players with those 5 picks, or they traded back a little bit and still drafted all defensive players. So, but here's a scenario where I would be okay with Jalen Ramsey. Let's just say those trade talks break down. Nobody's saying, man, we're not taking on $21 million. We're not doing that. So guess what? If the Dolphins cut him post June 1, they can save a little change. They can save a little money. So if they're willing to take that hit, split up the dead cap money that they'll have or whatever, and they say, you know what, bye, Jalen, we're going on, we're moving on, parting ways. Mm-hmm. And then the Falcons come in and say, hey, big head, Ross send that little hey, big head text, you know what I'm saying? And say, hey, man, what you want to do, bro? I know you rock with your boy. Say, hey, come on down here. That's the type of situation that I will be cool with Jalen Ramsey. But as far as trade for him, you talking about draft capital potentially this year and next year? Nah, I'm good on that. No. We ain't doing that again, because guess what? They traded a 3rd round pick for somebody else. I ain't gonna say his name. I ain't gonna say his name ever again on this show. Okay. And look where they are right now in a draft that's deep with edge rushers that can get to the quarterback, and you don't got no 3rd round pick this year. So yeah.
Can I say though, I think all of us agree, like, a player like Jalen Ramsey, like, take the football aspect aside, where I'm going with this.
Oh yeah.
This is the perfect. Yeah, like, this is the perfect puzzle piece for the Falcons. This is what they're missing.
You're right about that.
And like, I know, Aaron, you called it baggage, and like, it certainly is. And there's a lot that comes with a player like Jalen Ramsey. However, the Falcons ethos that they've talked about for the last 5 years is simply not working. You need somebody to come in there and ruffle some feathers. Look at the Eagles. Look at all of the teams that are successful. You've got players that are willing to ruffle feathers in the locker room and on the field. That's important. I think that is important to the success of a football team. And the Falcons, they don't have a lot of that. They maybe have 1 or 2 outlier guys who are like sneakily like that, but they don't have a player who's outwardly like that, like Jalen Ramsey. So if everything worked in everybody's favor and you get him for cheaper than $21 million and all of these things, and you don't have to give up a lot of assets for it, great. Give me somebody with a lot of baggage, someone who's going to be vocal, someone who's going to call somebody out and be the storyline on Monday nationally. Like, that's to me what I think is going to get the Falcons going. Not like we're all pulling from the same rope, we're all hugging at the end of the day. Like, that doesn't matter to me when it comes to the NFL. And I know that it doesn't to championship teams either. So I think a Jalen Ramsey in that sense makes a lot of sense for the Falcons.
And think about this too, Maria. What I think the Falcons have to understand is there are different ways to ruffle feathers, right? Like, we're not saying to go out there and get the guy who is like legit in cell block D. Like, that's not the guy that we're saying to go get. But on the same token, you might want to get someone who flirts with possibly being in cell block D. Like, nothing's wrong with that guy. Somebody who can at least be reeled in if he needs to be reeled in.
Yes.
But yeah, I'm like, to me, I've said that too for a while now. That's the kind of boldness that I want to see from the Falcons this draft. Like, go get somebody that makes all of us go, ooh. Now, I wouldn't date him. I wouldn't want my cousin or my sister or my niecey poo to date him, but darn it, if he can't be that dude. Because look, Drake London right now being the only dog that I kind of see on that roster. I mean, like, yeah, we're going to need just more than light skin, you know.
T, you just made my day. You just made my day. You understand. You understand me. You see me. I feel seen right now.
Man,
I feel so seen right now because I wouldn't let Jalen Ramsey date my daughters either. No. You know? And that's okay.
And that is
we need guys like that in the locker room. Maria, you spot on. This is like therapy Thursday for me. Like I feel whole now. Like I feel so good inside my soul right now because this is what team building is all about. Yes. I played with some crazy mother blankers. I promise you I did. And I don't really talk to them nowadays, but it's still love. It's still love. I promise you. It's all love.
And did that not have a positive effect for you on the football field?
Did Jarvis not win a national championship with that team?
1,000%.
So, yes, it matters.
It's correlated.
Like we don't have to. We don't have to be best friends off the field. And we don't have to be besties 10, 15 years down the road, singing Kumbaya and doing all of this other stuff that is a part of the ethos.
Right.
Win a ring.
It sounds nice. It sounds nice. I want to get along with everybody, no doubt. Like that.
And I have several rings. I have several of them.
It sounds nicer, right?
Yes, I have several rings because my coach understood that. He understood he had to have guys that he knew that were going to do everything they were supposed to be. That was one of me. I did everything I was supposed to do. I ain't trying to get in trouble. I don't want to do that. But I knew I played with some guys that I knew. Hey, man, I might get a phone call at 2:00 in the morning. Like, hey, Jarvis, bro, you need to go get such and such. And that's okay. I promise it's okay.
But they gave you something different on the football field is the point.
Yes.
You don't want to add those people into the locker room for no reason. The point
and they're not good. Yeah. Sure.
The point
that has
is
to be
the people that have the baggage and will grab you by your shoulder pads and be like, let's get this ish together. Sure. Those are the kind of people that I feel like they're missing right now.
Yeah. At least other than Drake London. Because I'm going to keep saying that. They got one dog on that
Aaron,
roster.
you got nothing to say?
Look, you guys said it all. So I'm just what else do I got to add to this? Like, you want some psychopaths on the football field, and a couple of times you get some psychopaths in the locker room. So it's the same thing.
That is such a succinct way of wrapping up our train wreck. Yes. So one position rather, that we kind of debated a lot on this show and even on our Monday football party is on the offensive side of the ball and whether or not there's one acceptable position the Falcons can draft in the first round in 2025. We'll talk about whether or not this group has finally come to consensus on it when we get back. This episode of our Atlanta football party is brought to you by LinkedIn. So as a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. So that's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. So here's how it works. LinkedIn's new feature can help you with job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip. Add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture to double your reach to qualified candidates. No wonder 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high quality hires. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So Jarvis, William and Mary O-lineman Charles Grant finished his 7-team tour with the Falcons and with the Las Vegas Raiders, likely the second highest drafted FCS player, maybe after North Dakota State's Gray Zabel. Now, is offensive tackle the only acceptable non-defensive position the Falcons can draft in the first round in 2025?
No, it's not acceptable to draft in the first round. Because here's the thing. It's got to be edge rusher, and we ain't got to go into that. But here's where it is. It would be acceptable.
So Jarvis, can I throw something at you as a caveat?
Sure.
How about let's say first or second round? So I'll open it up because
not acceptable.
I'll open it up and
Nope.
The answer is still hell no, Maria. The answer is still hell no, but I just wanted to.
I'm with you.
No, it's not acceptable. No, the earliest I'll be willing to accept the Falcons drafting taking the tackle, 4th round. That's it. That's the earliest. The earliest. And you might be able to convince me if they're able to get a 3rd round pick, right?
Okay.
And they got a guy falls, let's say a guy falls, like Charles Grant may be available in the 3rd round. You know, who I feel like he's one of those he's the prototypical guy that Aaron and I talked about on Locked On Falcons. We was like, okay, yeah, we're looking at the situation with the tackles, both guys, Jake getting older. Caleb, I don't know if I necessarily want to keep him around a little bit, depending on the number, right? So bring a guy in that doesn't have to play this year, and then let him develop. And then with that, the idea of his ceiling is going to be high, and you could get him with a guy like Dwayne Leffert and let him get some of that good teaching in his first year, and then you can have some negotiating power with a guy like Caleb McGarry. Like, hey man, shoot, bro, we can replace you, dog. Like, you talking about you want $8-9 million for 3 years? Okay, all right, we're cool. We'll move on. But yeah, it will be absolutely an atrocious idea if they were to pick a tackle in 1st and 2nd round. I will be staunchly against it. And I would like for you all to tune in if they do that in the 1st round. Oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm going to do on that postcast draft show. I don't know. I have no idea what I would do. So
I feel like I need to invite Jarvis to if it happens. So Jarvis, I think you need to be standing on the ready next Thursday night when we do our little our capsules for each of the 1st round draft picks. I think you need to be ready to join Aaron and me when we talk about 15.
Man, look, I'm sorry, T. If I join, I might.
Don't get fired, Jarvis.
I don't want to get fired. I love working for Locked On. David Locke. You know what I'm saying? I appreciate that man so much for bringing me on to this situation. But oh my gosh, I gotta get my true feelings free. I can't hold that back because I've been seeing some dumb mock drafts. With offensive tackle in the 1st round. Just dumb.
So dumb. Okay, but Jarvis, do you think, and I'm sorry, Free, I'm coming to you, I promise, but Jarvis keeps throwing things out there that I got to come back on. So is it, close your ears, Free, this is going to be a little tough for you to listen to. So, but Jarvis, is it dumb? Really dumb because maybe people are still considering, seriously, the mock drafters are still considering what we've seen from this Falcons organization time after time after time for Terry Fontenot, where, as Free said, we all know they should zig and they zag.
I mean, I'm real big. Here's the thing. When it comes to these mock drafts, I'm wholeheartedly in lockstep with guys who pick who they feel would be the best way. And if you're picking an offensive tackle just because you feel like that's the zag pick so you can be right, I don't think that highly of you. So pick who you think, you say, okay, all right, given the situation, the tackle situation, given the offensive lineman, I feel like this guy has something that the Falcons need. I feel like Dwayne Leffert can maximize this guy's potential to the utmost. So this is why I'm picking this guy. But if you're picking him just because, oh yeah, I just want to be right, I don't care about that type of stuff. I'm real big on believing your eyeballs. I believe what I see. And what I see is not a tackle need in the 1st round for this team. I just don't see that. So yeah, whatever. Yeah, whatever to those people. Yes.
Sorry to this man. So for you, Free, is it that offensive to you, the mere thought of the Falcons taking an O tackle in the 1st round, the 2nd round, or if they happen to snag a 3rd round draft pick, that they would go with an O tackle?
Yeah, I mean, Jarvis kind of nailed it. I don't know if I'm as passionate about it as Jarvis is, but I do feel like if you're going to take an offensive player, it makes sense for the Falcons to take an offensive tackle just because it's kind of a premium position. It's hard to get good players at that spot, obviously, because of the age of Jake Matthews and Caleb McGarry going into a contract year. There is potentially a big need for an offensive tackle. And, in the future for the Falcons to use a premium pick on an offensive tackle, and if you want to get ahead of that, it makes sense. But I'm with you on the sense of, to me, it only makes sense if you can find a way to trade back and add a third round pick in some form or fashion. And then you can basically say, okay, well, we got an extra pick in the top 100. And so now, again, I'm not going to necessarily love it, but like it makes more sense to me. It's like, okay, well, originally with the three picks we had in the first 4 rounds, we were going to go all defense with those picks in some order. We know edge rusher 1, and then corner, D tackle, safety, whatever you want to go for rounds 2 and 4. And then so you pick up an extra third round pick. Now you have a little bit more flexibility to say, okay, well, we can take the offensive tackle, hopefully not in round 2, but at least it will be more forgivable to me, in the sense of if you were to use one of those day 2 picks or that 4th round pick on an offensive tackle, because you were able to add more draft capital. And not to say it becomes a luxury pick, because again, I still think it would be better served to use that pick on a defensive player that can come in and help improve what is been one of the worst defenses in the NFL. That's a more pressing need right now to help you win games in 2025 than the offensive tackle position. But at least if you're going to get a Charles Grant or one of these guys, maybe around round 3, that I'm not going to lose too much sleep over that, because I do think it makes sense for the Falcons to take an offensive tackle. But like Jarvis, to me, as it sits here today, like I'm waiting to the 4th round to take that guy. But if you were to trade back, it gives you a little bit more flexibility in that regard.
Yeah. All right, Maria, where do you stand here? This is a tough one, because I think that there's so much passion around what the Falcons should or should not do in that first, second round as it relates to an offensive player, or even if they do somehow get back into the 3rd round. But for you, I mean, how do you feel about the possibility of them going, and I'll say offensive tackle, like I won't even say offensive player, we'll go tackle. How would you feel if they ended up going that way, 1st, 2nd, or 3rd, if they get a 3rd?
I mean, they can't do that. They literally cannot do that. It's a free guarantee, right? So everything that we've talked about, there's no way that they can do that. No, I'm serious. Like if we come into a situation where I'm sitting in this room in Green Bay next year and I hear rumblings that a tackle's coming off the board in the 1st round, oh boy, it's going to be not great. If you want to change the trajectory of the way things are going for your franchise, you got to change the way you do things, which means you can't draft an offensive player in the 1st round. There's not a need for that. There's going to be ones that you can get later in the draft to where it works out for you. I promise. And we've seen the only thing that gives me hope that that's not actually going to happen. The only thing is that we have seen Terry Fontenot be successful in later rounds with offensive linemen. We just saw what happened. Guess who went to the Bears? And he turned out to be one of the most expensive offensive linemen that we've seen recently. Worked out for him. So, that's the only thing that gives me hope. In no scenario would I be okay with this. Truly, in no scenario would I be okay. And then I know, we talked about last year when Mykel Penix came off the board, who was sitting there. Jalen Carter was sitting there, and people are thinking, oh, of course the Falcons are going to pick him. Like, no way, they don't. I just don't think there's any scenario where I would be okay with it. However, the only way that I think that I would be okay is just to see the reaction of Jarvis. Just to see the reaction of Jarvis.
Y'all want to make this a spectacle. Y'all want me to embarrass myself? Like this?
I don't think you'd embarrass yourself. I don't.
Yeah, it's not an embarrassment. No, it's entertainment.
I don't think you'd embarrass yourself, but I do think it would be incredibly entertaining. But for the betterment of the franchise, let's just not even put that into the universe.
Yeah.
Picking an offensive player.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And like you guys said, we are speaking in jest, tongue in cheek here, but the reality is there really should be no scenario in which anybody on this show, and I'll add Tori in from our Monday football party, because Tori is the person who, for the AtlantaFalcons.com website and so many other properties that team uses, she has to shift gears when this type of thing happens. So we don't want that for her either. But I think that for this fan base and for this franchise, seriously, because when you think about, the Panthers probably are not still in the conversation, but you never know what might happen. The Saints are in Athens as well. The Saints are also looking at Shedeur Sanders and might actually go with him. And who knows, he might be that guy who also has an impact similar to QBs from the class of 2024. So maybe they somehow miraculously find themselves in a conversation that they should not be in. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are probably still going to be in the conversation to win the NFC South. And I feel like in the NFC, the Falcons' path, even this year, still remains the path to the postseason is to win the division. So as much as we're joking and we're like, oh God, we don't want to hear it, we don't want it to happen. But at the end of the day, ultimately speaking, I think we just want the Falcons to do what they need to do in order to have the conversation we thought we were going to have at the end of last season, which is the postseason drought for this franchise finally ends. Thanks to our everydayers for making the Atlanta Football Party your first listen of the day. Be sure to stop by Locked On Falcons with your host, Aaron Freeman, as your second listen. And check out Maria Martin, host of Sports Extra on Sundays on 11 Alive. And, of course, check out our guy, Jarvis, who is a frequent contributor for Locked On Falcons and Sports Extra. We'll see you next time.